Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself. Feeling ready to kick your sales into high gear? We're here to help. Check out our sales coaching and consulting services at predictablerevenue.com. Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Colin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Daisy Chung. She's the head of revenue strategy over at Orum, and we're going to talk about how to get sales and customer success to work together. Daisy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Super excited, Colin, to chat. It's a fun topic. I think a really relevant topic in today's world. So happy to dive right in.
Totally. Now, I think in the past, sales and CS used to be all one. Like, I don't want to play the old guy card, but it used to be you were an account, you were just a generic salesperson, and you handled, sales, account management, a little bit of customer success. And then that kind of role got broken up into a bunch of different roles. And that's where I suspect kind of the old way did it a little bit better, but it wasn't as efficient. So it may be one advantage of the old way. And then when we've specialized our sales roles, like the book, Predictable Revenue, we've created some gaps, some inefficiencies, largely, I think, better, but I'm excited to talk about some of the downsides of the specialization. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, where did this idea come from about, getting them to work together? Why is it important to, even if somebody's listening, why should they be like, oh, I have to listen to the rest of the, 40 minutes where we're going to go today?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it boils down to the word revenue. Like, revenue isn't a one size fit all. It doesn't come solely from any one department. It comes from all departments working together, and primarily the biggest driver to revenue, I say, would be sales and client success, with other departments kind of supporting that based on the product, the marketing, all that fun stuff. And so when it comes down to it, seeing how the landscape has changed every so years, and especially during the COVID years, like, the recession's hitting, et cetera, revenue has become an even more important topic that I don't think people really talk or think too much about, because you're siloed in your departments, depending on what kind of company you work for. Because as you mentioned, it's not just old school. I'd say even smaller startups where you don't have a lot of headcount, you're an all-in-one. If you're the CEO, you're also the SDR, you're also the AE, you're also client success, you're also HR. And as you build like a 10, 20, 30 employee company, a lot of times you're still that full cycle rep with client success. But as you mature more, 50, 100, 200, 1,000 employees plus, usually you have separate roles for CS, for sales development. You get very specific. I think the perspective is the more specialized you are in your function, the better you are at your job, the better results we see. And that's why people usually specialize, the bigger they go. Where it kind of breaks apart is that when you have multiple departments and too many roles, sometimes people aren't always talking to one another. Everyone's focused on their vision, their goal, as it makes sense. Sales has a goal, drive as much, ARR as possible. Success has a goal, have as much user engagement, have as much retention, have as much expansion. Everyone's kind of focused on that. And when you don't kind of silo or merge the goals together on the bigger picture, things can get lost with the great effort you're putting in. So I'll just give a quick example. Your CS team can be a rock star CS team. Clients are, for the most part, happy, things like that. But maybe CS is really focused on the biggest client, as most CS teams are. You're focused on the biggest client. But maybe sales is closing the most volume in the smallest client. And so there's a mismatch in terms of vision and focus, or vice versa. Maybe sales is only, really focused or comped on big deals, and CS is spending a lot of time with the volume of small customers. That's where some clashes can happen when it drives revenue. Are we trying to retain and focus on the biggest clients, the smallest client? Where is our go-to-market motion? And then on top of that, there's a flurry of things where you can really further that alignment, including comp plans, trainees, incentives. Are we speaking the same language? And I see that when you kind of really marry the two, that's when you optimize revenue. And revenue, I'd say, is no longer just retaining a client. It's retaining a client for years to come. Because, 1 year renewal, 2 year renewal, that's great. But you spend so much effort and time marketing and selling and nurturing this client that unless it's a strong partnership for multiple years to come, as a revenue leader or a CEO of a company, you're probably not as happy with the results and repeatable clients here.
All right. So I'm curious, and I appreciate the setup there. I'm curious what wasn't working. What have you seen? Help me see some, or can you talk to me about some examples you've seen in the past where maybe sales and CS weren't working together?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it. I work with a lot of different companies, and I kind of see it across the board. It's, I mean, being in sales development for a very long time, I've always seen it where, unfortunately, fingers being pointed when something doesn't work. Like if sales isn't closing meetings, then sales development is being pointed at, well, we need better meetings, or marketing, you're not getting us inbounds. And then, sales development will poke at sales for not closing. And it's always kind of that blame game in almost every org I've seen or spoken with. And it's kind of similar in terms of sales and CS, where, CS can say, well, you're throwing us not the best ICP clients. And sales go, well, you're not taking care of my clients. Yeah, it's the age-old, like, every department's going to say one thing or another. And why there's extra emphasis on this is because sales and client success are the forefront to driving revenue. So that alignment is more important than ever. And again, because we've had so much, the recession, layoffs, and unfortunately, the first team usually to go is sales development when layoffs happen, because it's purely a number piece. That's why the tighter alignment will make it a little more foul-proof, if you will, to when recessions happen, make it very clear how we're driving revenue together and how we're sustaining customers like that to make everyone happier. And I could see it in a lot of the folks I work with directly where, when revenue is there, everyone's happy and no one cares about anything else. And when it's not there, it doesn't really matter whose fault it is. Things get cut, programs get slowed down, no one can hire as quickly. And so that's why I think if a company really focuses on this and the synergy behind it, it's no longer finger pointing, but more so like, hey, how do we expand and double and triple down so the whole company's happier?
Love that. And so I'd love to understand kind of this ultimate upside. The company's happier, we're making more money. How? Can you talk to me about some examples of ways where you've seen it work where, the two teams working together are creating more money?
Yeah, I think it goes back to focus, like focusing on the same vision and goal. Our vision and our goal is to, we identify these 50 customers, which are great for, referrals and case studies and all that fun stuff. And these are the ones we really want to focus time and energy to grow with. And that way, sales team can continue selling into those type of customers, because from the client success side, we see these type of customers are the ones that will shout through the roof and rave about the company. And that's how you get more sales. It goes hand in hand. Happy customers in your ICP, I want to be specific here, will get you more sales and rinse and repeat. Not all clients are the same, unfortunately. Some of them, there are bad clients. And when there are bad clients, they usually churn, they're usually the loudest, they usually take the most resources. And it's not fair to the client either, because they didn't realize they weren't exactly your ICP. So that's where the back and forth language really does help to solidify the vision and the goal. And these are the type of customers we see, really expanding with us, shouting through the roof. And that's where we should sell to, and that's where we should service. And that synergy gets you more and better quality revenue.
Got it. And I wondered if you could tell me about a time where you had to make a change to make an improvement. It could be at Orum or in a previous role with kind of the ways things were aligned.
Yeah, I would say both past and even at Orum, like segmentation. Like segmentation doesn't come overnight. When you first are with a company, usually the territory is anything and everything. And then as you get bigger, it's like, oh, you get East Coast, West Coast, Central Coast, and then you get into the states, and then you get into the zip code, and you get really, really granular. And so segmentizing and double segmentizing early and often when it does with the company goes a real long way. And when I say double segmentation, sometimes it's not just enough to like do it by location. I think like industry specific or persona specific gets you not only a tighter sales process, but a tighter client success experience. Imagine a world where you're a customer and your CSM and your sales rep knows your industry like the back of their hand. They know exactly what goes on in the podcast world. They know exactly what goes on in the HR world, the security world. They're speaking your language, they're servicing your language. they're sharing best practices of everything they're seeing and at your time zone. That, the more you can double, triple segmentation, which takes time, the more specific your sales and client success process can be to drive, again, happier customers with the right customers that will double, triple down on, retention with you.
I'm curious, when at Orum, picking those top 50 customers, what segment, like what did you look at to go and find those top 50? Like what segments, what categories, or like what filters did you put into your data?
Yeah, for Orum specifically, industry specific works well for us because we know exactly how to optimize, calling for the HR industry or the security industry or the recruiting industry or specific industries. And from there, a lot of best practice come from, and, it doubles down to see who our loudest and happiest customers are for some of these industry. What's also cool, because this is an ever-growing space, there's always new industries we're breaking into that kind of sheds a different light. So that's where a lot of times, like, these playbooks can't be stagnant. I think a lot of times once things are working, you're happy enough, things are stagnant, you kind of rinse and repeat the same playbook. But for you to really thrive in, 2025 and onwards, where AI, technology, everything's kind of on this tip of the iceberg of what's to come, you really have to always iterate and relook at your playbook for ways to improve. Because if you don't, and things are looking good at that time, before you know it, something's going to happen in the world that's going to impact you quicker than you can change things. And so I think that's the second aspect of making sure you stay on top of it. And that's where, again, it's not a silo department. Revenue is holistic, and these iterations to playbook should not be silos, which I've seen in many companies where, like, okay, sales is going to change one thing, or marketing or CS or HR, etc. But you kind of have to come together and decide on that future playbook together.
I remember talking to Mark Roberge about this. I can't remember which podcast it was, but it was one of our earlier ones. I think he was promoting sales acceleration formula, and I know he talked about this in the book. But there was a time at HubSpot where they had the CS, and I don't know if they called it CS at the time, but their CS and their account executive incentives were not aligned at all. And it was really, the problem was with the account execs, they weren't incentivized on client lifetime, so they were just selling churn. And they had a huge number of 3-month customers, and that created a massive problem because it looked like as soon as they handed a deal off from sales to onboarding to customer success, they churned. And so if you just look at the data, it shows CS sucks, maybe. Yeah. It's one interpretation. It's the wrong interpretation, obviously. But so how do you prevent that?
Exactly. That's such a great point. And a lot of times, like, data tells so many different stories. It tells a story you wanted to tell, to be honest. And if you don't really dig in and get more perspective, it can tell the wrong story, which could really, be damaging for the company. So that's where I think, like, comp plans are super important. Most employees are incentivized by compensation, as they should be. And so starting from the top of putting the comp plan so it makes sense, if you are wanting to keep clients for years to come, there should be comp incentives for multi-year deals. If you want, if you're needing the extra support from the sales team after the sales, then there should be compensation that reflects that, and quota that reflects that. That's realistic. So if you want your AEs to be spending, let's say, half their time or a fourth of their time ensuring renewals in partnership with CSM, the comp plan needs to reflect that. And I think it's not only coming into agreement with both the department leaders and what that comp plan looks like, but also getting outside perspective. Because when you're siloed in departments, naturally you want what's best for your department, and you might come to a certain understanding alignment, but there's always pieces you might not align to. So getting outside perspective, multiple outside perspective, will help validate and deepen that alignment, because there's no bias when it's outside looking into.
I love that. I'm curious, one area where I think sales and the revenue side doesn't involve another department is getting the product people in. I mean, they're the ones that, obviously the founder is typically the one that kind of found the gap in the market, but it's been the founder and the product people working together to understand what are all these segments. And I think one of the biggest misses in kind of revenue product people founding companies is that product does all this work and then it just kind of dies in a document and it doesn't get handed off as effectively to sales. And I can't say it always happens, but I've worked with a number of companies, and I'll ask, how has your product team helped, you figure this out? And it's empty. I'm curious, what have you learned from your product team, and what can you help them learn from the revenue side?
Yeah, I can't agree more. That alignment and partnership product is so critical for the revenue side. People don't usually talk about it; it glaze over it, and product top usually isn't aligned to how sales is doing or CS is doing. Mm-hmm. And I love our product team at Orum. I feel that they are mission driven with us, and that's really important. Like, you have to hire people that cares beyond their role in their department. They have to care about the mission, vision. They have to be jumping into calls. They have to be listening to customers. And that's where it comes full circle. Like, a good product team will jump in on customers' call, will jump in on sales calls, and kind of bridge the two things. Because sometimes clients might be asking for different things in sales. And sometimes, like, who are we prioritizing and why? And that, again, goes back to that alignment. Are you prioritizing specific industries, ICP, these top 50 accounts, the volume of customer? Because that will push product to prioritize. If it's based on volume of customers, then product's going to focus on the 1, 2, 3 features that most customers are asking. If it's focused on the top 50, then you have to find trends on what product and features matter. And usually, like, if it's enterprise focused, a lot of it comes from like compliance, security, things that aren't even that obvious because they need to check those boxes to procure you as a software. And that's where it really comes full circle of them listening and being these calls. And you have to work in tandem to prioritize, because of course you love to build the perfect product that has any and every bells and whistles, but bells and whistles die. Build anything, everything. I always say the thing, like, you have $1 million, you can pay an engineer to build anything and everything, because if they're smart people, they can build things. But if you just go out there and build anything and everything, it's a temporary fix, and the behind the scenes long-term impact when things start breaking for the customer 5 months from now, because they were built something really quickly because it appeased them, is not going to go well. So prioritizing and thinking ahead, and not just saying, yes, we'll build this, we'll build that. That's a temporary fix. Long-term revenue is a happy customer, not just now, but like 5, 6, 7, 8 months down the line.
I love that. And then if you're getting product involved, have they helped steer sort of like who the top 50 are, or have they been involved in that process at all?
Yeah, yes and no. Yes, in terms of there's feedback and showing, hey, these are the clients that have like optimized all the best practices. These are clients who are not optimizing quite yet, and this is where we can help them optimize. And so it identifies like which clients are really using the features to maximize potential, which haven't used the feature, which are underutilizing, all that fun stuff, because that will give trends to understand, again, like, is it because we're selling to the wrong client, or is it because we're not training the clients in a specific way? So you have to give the data pieces, but you have to be able to decipher what is the real impact and story behind it.
Gotcha. Now, I'm curious. Oh, go ahead.
One last thing I'm super passionate, because I do think product really drives the revenue piece behind the scene. Because part of revenue is also your burn rate and your hiring. Like, you can always, if you overhire, more people doesn't mean a better company. It's actually, the more you can maximize each person's potential and bandwidth. And so if you're able to cooperate and work with products so they build more things where it's less of a human touch, and the human touch is more on the relationship and kind of creativity and thinking outside the box, that's where it also impacts revenue too. And a lot of times it's unspoken, because people don't really think product equals revenue. They think about usually sales, to be honest. They think about all the man hours a product can be built to save servicing time and time in general. That also equivalates to revenue too.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think product is the reason why your customers are there in the first place. And so, product equals, there's no revenue without product. Though some companies from the early 80s, 90s might disagree with me. But I think I think product is kind of the ultimate retention play, where as long as the product's continuing to get better, continuing to deliver on the, that magic moment, that aha moment, that promise that the revenue team is taking to market, customers should be sticking around.
Yeah. And that's where the human element helps, because again, like, if you look at like a lot of, I know evaluators will checkbox things like, hey, you have this, they have that. This company has 5 more things than you. They're probably the better company. But it's not always the case. It's very surface level. And so that's where the human element comes in to really show and connect the pain point, like features aside, what they care about, and kind of show the future 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, how things are done differently. Because I think a lot of times people confuse building a good product as building a lot of things. A lot of things is great if a lot of things are built well in a way that scales. And a lot of times that's hidden from the customer, where they don't see the pain point and the pieces that break until months down the line, because it was built so quickly. And they're like, oh, yeah, you can do that for me. You're quick at building. I like you guys. But a lot of times once you're in that contract, either a 1, 2, 3 contract, 5 months later, something breaks. You can't get out of that contract. And usually that's where, again, I'm very passionate the human element comes to play. It's deeper than just whichever has the most features out there.
100%. And I'm curious because, when we're talking about getting product involved, obviously they're going to have a user persona or stories or feedback that they're building towards, and customer success is going to have their, what they've learned, and sales is going to have their target list of who they're going after. I'm curious about kind of how you align these things at Orum. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So it comes from having that organic feedback and then taking like a bigger look from the outside in. That's where I think having a really cohesive engineering, product, sales, and CS leader really comes into play. So where I see that worked really well at Orum is, again, when we hire our execs and in general, like people are mission driven and not just department driven. That is important because when you think about the mission of the company as first and foremost, then the decisions you make, especially from up top, comes from that versus coming from, again, like product team. They want to build out as many features as possible. That's not always the best move. Sales wants to close as many deals as possible. That's also not the best move because there are bad customers. CS wants to retain volume, but what if retaining volume loses out on some of your bigger customer because there's less of those? And so drilling back to the main mission, if you have that aligned, you have department leaders who are mission focused, they put aside kind of the ego and thought of like making their department the very best, even though maybe it's not the best for the entire company. And so when you align on the mission, and sales are asking for different features, CS is asking for different features, product wants to focus on different features because they believe that's like the best way to make things better. It comes from a place from having department leaders who are putting ego aside and looking at the bigger picture. So that's what we typically do at Orum. We have like weekly and regular leadership meetings backed by data across all avenues, and that's where you can make decisions that makes the most sense for the growth of customers and prospects alike.
Got it. And I'm curious, how do you balance that tension between, you've talked about the tension that sales wants to close as many deals and CS only wants to have kind of the best customers entering the pipeline, and product has their own vision for the product. How do you balance the tension, between, focusing and comp plans and all of that? Because there are naturally going to be competing priorities. So how do we get everybody aligned there?
Yeah. So, and what's cool about Orum is we're fully remote, and you think like that's even harder to align because you don't see folks. That's why we do like quarterly and regular meetings where the executive has the retreat. The whole company has a regular retreat. Like we do multiple things to bring people together where there's that focus and energy. And usually you tie it to a slogan. And I've seen it work really well at Orum and in general, like just life in general, when you have a slogan people rally towards, it drives them to the mission and vision. So when you're hiring, doing your work, et cetera, is it doing better? And so I know in the past, we had different visions, where everyone's all in, where we're thinking bigger. Think bigger sounds really simple, but it means to think outside the box, not just address your problem head on, but like, what are the ripple effects above your specific decision? And so having that come from the top and iterate it over and over again, call it every quarter, really hones everyone together, especially if you're in a remote environment, to focus on the same things. And that's where, again, a lot of it comes from top up, like the executive alignment and mission has to be on the same page for everyone to execute the same way.
Mm-hmm. And what about when it comes down to like balancing like the comp plans? Like sales is going to be incentivized for one thing and CS is going to be incentivized for another. Is there anything that we can do to kind of help bridge that gap?
Absolutely. When looking at comp plans, you have to look at it together. I think a lot of times is the sales leader or CS leader looks at their comp plan, they get it approved from finance versus they should create their comp plan and swap the comp plans and make edits and changes and come into alignment, as well as get another outside party in so that it makes sense. And a lot of times, I think it also makes sense to pull in some of the ICs or lower management that you trust their opinion or, are inspired by their opinion. Because I think a lot of times when, especially as the company grows really quick, let's say you grow from 0 employees to 100 to 1,000, a lot of times, when you're in those executive position, you sometimes forget a little bit of what it's like being in the field, like, and what's happening. So getting that IC perspective as well will help kind of cement any gaps and holes too. And no comp plan's perfect. No matter how much you do and try, like there's always kind of a small gap here and there. And that's why it's always about iteration. Just like you iterate your playbooks, you got to iterate your comp plans because the incentives are what drives the behavior. And if you're stuck with the same incentives, you're not iterating, it doesn't go well. So.
Totally. I've got a couple last questions before we get to like what Orum does, but I'd love to know, just kind of opening up the aperture, when we're thinking about the gaps between sales and CS, what change would you like to see? It can be industry-wide, it can be something specific that you could kind of wave a magic wand.
Yeah, if I could wave a magic wand, I would say I would love to see a world where folks who are hired for sales roles are also interviewed as if they're interviewed for a CS role and vice versa. I believe every seller can, it's because the prospect client journey starts from the selling. And if you have a customer-oriented sales rep from the get-go, it not only drives a better experience, but higher chance of you closing that revenue. And very similar when you're hiring a CS rep, you should hire someone that have negotiated in the past, that have, spoken with high-level executives that can run a process playbook like a sales rep does. And that's going to breed empathy across both departments, but also a very, very strong process for the customer.
On the first side, I think it was hiring, product-focused reps. How do you look for that?
Client success service reps. Product would be a nice to have, but yeah, so we're merging these two departments to be a closer aligned. You want to hire folks that are great sales professional with a client success oriented mindset. And you want to hire CS folks that are great CS account managers, but also have sales background, tenacity, or the ability to grow to become sales professional. The playbook would be to drive kind of the different things you test for in one and the other department across the board. So like in sales, a lot of times at Orum, we do mock discovery calls to have them run a sales process and like do a discovery call, do a demo as if they work at Orum to evaluate how they multi-thread, how they drive the attention of everyone, how to make sure they're intently listening. And so very similar if I would have the CS person do an interview where it's a mock retention call-up meeting where there's a CFO and a head of whatever industry you're selling, and they have to control the conversation and drive that multi-threading. And you're kind of testing to see if they have those innate skills to have those conversations. So that would be my idea, which is, it's a work in progress. And I think knowing and kind of doing the other person's role gives you empathy and makes you so much better when you're trying to tie sales and CS together.
I love it. I really appreciate you coming on the show today. Before we wrap, I'd love to learn a little bit about Orum. So tell me what they do. And
Yes, absolutely. So my pleasure. I've been at Orum for over almost 5 years now. So I live and breathe Orum every day here. We are a conversation platform driven by AI to drive more live quality conversation with the people you want to connect with. Long story short, over the years, we've learned that it's not just about more calls, more dials, a bunch of things. It's about how do we get the person you want to pick up, call it a CFO, CEO, CMO, and for you to be prepared to have a good conversation. It all ties back to revenue. And so I just want to share that caveat because a lot of times people think, oh, dialers mean more is better. It's not the case. It's how do we get actual conversations and actual meetings with people you want to book to drive revenue.
Love that. If people are looking to learn a little bit more about Orum or connect with you, where's the best place for them to go?
LinkedIn, I'm pretty active, so they can find me on LinkedIn. They can go to Orum's website, orum.com, request a demo, and happy to show them what Orum does.
Perfect. I'm going to throw a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. Daisy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Colin. Had a lot of fun here.
Yeah, me too. And thanks to everybody for listening. We'll catch you all next week.